Welcome to another Sasha Responds video where I share my thoughts about your comments and questions left under videos. And today's question was selected by my producer, and I'm going to take a look at it and give you guys my off-the-cuff reaction. So today's question comes from Scott Lee Spence. So Scott says, I volunteer with an LGBT community center where we have a weekly game night that is heavily attended by people in their late teens through late 20s. The majority of them identify as trans or non-binary. Being on the autism spectrum myself and being in my 50s with a lifetime of experience coping with it, I've noticed that a lot of the attendees exhibit behaviors consistent with being on the spectrum. I suffered a lot as a young man because of my gender nonconformity and spent many hours, especially in my teens, thinking I would be better off as a girl. I'm grateful I didn't grow up in today's environment where I might have been pressured to take steps that I would have later regretted. Scott, thank you so much for writing in about your experience here at the community center and just kind of reflecting back about your own childhood. I think, Scott, your question is a really good example of how the fantasy of being the other sex is an experience that can actually be just like a normal stepping stone in someone's process of development and doesn't necessarily mean that you are destined to change your identity or transition. It could just mean that you need time to accept kind of quirky things about yourself and work through it as you get older, as you develop, as you gain life experience, as you mature. And, I've heard from so many people with similar stories, and it seems to be really, for some people, a generational difference. Now, granted, I know that a lot of people who are, in different generations felt gender dysphoric and wished to be the other sex and went on to transition, socially, medically, or both or otherwise. However, I hear from lots of people who say, had I done that, I would have missed out on so much. I think I would have regretted it and I wouldn't have the life that I have now. And ultimately, I was able to work through my gender dysphoria or my cross-sex fantasies, right? Because like a lot of people didn't even call this gender dysphoria. They just called it, just like Scott said, I was just wishing that I was a girl, or I thought I would have been better off as a girl. That is even an important distinction. And I think the fact that we have these definitions and these labels and these medical interventions in and of itself changes the way a person relates to their thoughts and feelings and desires, just like Scott mentioned. He just thought he would have been better off as a girl, but presumably at the time, there wasn't an option. That wasn't an option for him to become a girl. And so he found other ways to manage and understand his experience and ultimately move through it. And I just think that's really important. And that's why I find it so troubling that kind of the gender affirming approach has really zeroed in on just one strategy and one pathway that is frankly so narrow and so short-sighted because it completely fails to account for people like Scott and hundreds and thousands of other people who have felt some of these gender conflicts and ultimately worked their way through them. And, even though I've heard from lots of people who have stories like Scott's and similar ones, these types of stories are pretty much absent in the conversation around gender dysphoria. Right now, if you are a young person or an adult person who is thinking, gosh, I think I would have been better as a different sex or in a different gender identity, the only information you're going to get is about people who, explored that, concluded that they were trans, and decided to change their identity or medically transition. You almost never hear that, hey, gender dysphoria is something that might resolve. That's not how it's framed. So there are lots of stories that are just totally absent and invisible in the kind of narrative. And to be honest, guys, representation, right? Like we talk about how important it is to see people like yourself represented in different media. And I think that really matters, because knowing what is possible through the exploration of other people's stories and what has happened for this or that person, and thinking about different ways that people resolve their distress, it puts possibilities in our minds. It gives us the ability to imagine, to fantasize, to consider, and to shift the way we respond to ourselves. And so I just really appreciate Scott's question, because he's not the only one. And yet we never really hear those stories when we talk about gender and gender identity and gender dysphoria. So thank you. And kind of another thing that comes to mind for me is that, we live in a culture which in some ways we're so lucky to have a lot of action-oriented strategies for things. We have tools, we have techniques, we have apps, we have therapists, we have doctors. Like, there are lots of things that we can do. That's really like the American way, isn't it? That like when we have a problem, we fix it. And I think in some contexts that is great, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. Like, I'm really grateful to have that kind of cultural proactivity, I guess. However, I also personally have found a lot of Eastern philosophy, and I studied the Tao Te Ching, and a lot of concepts like non-action have been very, very valuable to me. And things like waiting, just waiting and seeing what happens before jumping to strategize a solution or fix the problem or eradicate the distress, that has been huge, both in my life personally and in the process of therapy. I've seen how valuable it can be to just be present with a difficult experience without rushing to find a solution. And I think practicing restraint and practicing patience is something that we're kind of lacking in our culture. And I also feel like just with the way technology moves so fast, you guys see, I'm here on YouTube, like I'm a user of technology and I'm so grateful for it. But it kind of tricks us into thinking that everything has a really fast solution. And some things, especially like questions of human thriving and how to deal with suffering, these do not have rapid fire solutions. There's no hacks to just like magically make yourself feel better immediately. And I think some of that plays into the way, the pharmaceutical industry and drug companies and, medical professionals, of course, they have a tool and they want to offer it to people. I'm not saying that's a malicious thing, but I just think everybody could really benefit from saying, okay, I'm having this distress, I'm having this fantasy, I'm having this thought, just like Scott said. Do I have to act on it right now? Can I just be? Can I just learn to be patient with myself, get curious about what this means, and not be in a rush to resolve and fix everything right away? So I hope that resonates with you guys. This is a philosophy and a belief and a value that I have that has really served me well. And I think it's really important to extend a little bit of patience and curiosity to different struggles that we encounter in life. So in light of that, that's why I created the Hidden Roots series to kind of talk about like, hey, there's different ways to understand what this means. And I'm going to continue talking about different options that people have that maybe they haven't thought of. And so, Scott, thank you so much for writing in. I really appreciate hearing about your experience. And I love hearing from all of you guys. So please continue to leave your comments and questions underneath videos, and you may be featured in another Sasha Responds. So thank you for watching, keeping one foot in reality and one in possibility. I'll see you next time. And if you want to watch more Sasha Responds videos, just click here. This information is meant for educational purposes only and not as a substitute for mental health services.